Hello and welcome. It's 1 p.m. India time or 7:30 GMT, and it's 3:30 in the afternoon in Beijing, where Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi has landed. Now, after the UN rejected Pakistan's mediation request on Jammu and Kashmir, it looks like Pakistan is reaching out to anyone who will listen. Pakistan has knocked on its longtime ally China's doors now. Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi has reached Beijing. Now, these are the latest visuals coming to you from Beijing, where, as I mentioned, Qureshi has landed. He's expected to hold talks on India's move on Jammu and Kashmir. The Pakistan Foreign Secretary Sohail Mehmood is accompanying the minister. Now, before leaving for China, Qureshi said that India was trying to destroy regional peace with its unconstitutional measures. He said that Pakistan will take Chinese leadership into confidence. Remember, China opposed India's move, saying that it undermined China's territorial sovereignty. New Delhi brushed off Beijing's statement, saying that it is India's internal matter. Now, the Pakistan Foreign Minister's unscheduled visit to Beijing is going to coincide with India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar's visit to China. He'll be traveling to Beijing from the 11th to the 13th of this month. All right, joining me live from Beijing this moment is Einar Thangan, a political and economic commentator. Good afternoon to you, and thank you for joining us on WION World is One. Now, as we speak, Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mehmood Qureshi has landed in Beijing. Now, you've been a long-time watcher of how Beijing thinks, how Beijing acts. If I were to ask you to look into the crystal ball, as it were, help us understand how China or what China might actually tell Qureshi in the hours ahead.
Well, I think it'll be a repeat of what they said initially, which is that both India and Pakistan need to sit down and figure this out. I think China sees its role more as a mediator. It is not going to be deciding this. This is an issue that is long-standing historical aspects going back more than 1,000 years. So it's not going to be solved in a day. The issue now is, will there be escalation? And the hope on Beijing's side is that that will not be the case. I think that they're being joined in that by the UN and also by the EU.
All right. Since you mentioned and referred to the Chinese statement, which was issued 2 days ago on India's move on Jammu and Kashmir, I want to ask you a very pointed question. How can China encroach on India's sovereignty and territorial integrity in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir by undertaking the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor or CPEC project and invoke Chinese sovereignty in the same statement at the same time?
Well, as you well know, I mean, the entire area has been under dispute for some time. India has claims, Pakistan has claims, China has claims. There have been many wars and there have been many kingdoms that have been in charge of that area. Once again, you could go back to the setup of the most recent disputes as probably going back to British colonial times and Mountbatten. But I don't need to tell you about the history. At this point, the issues come up about the line of actual control, and there had been an expectation, especially with the October tete-a-tete, which is coming up between Xi and Modi, that things were on track for perhaps a better, more future-focused situation, especially economically. I think China was surprised by this. I think most people were, although Modi had run on this issue. They were surprised that this took precedent over perhaps economic changes, which are perhaps more to the point and needed, especially as the world economy seems to be drifting downwards.
Now, Einar Thangan, you say that you don't want to delve into history, but let's delve into history, if you will. if you ask me as a journalist, China is a serial offender. Be it Aksai Chin, be it the CPEC project in what India calls its own territory in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, be it South China Sea. In some people's estimation, China should be the last country in the world to invoke Chinese sovereignty over issues or areas that are claimed by others. So isn't there a paradox in what the Chinese statement actually says?
Well, as I said, there are different perspectives. The Chinese believe that they're correct. India believes they're correct, and Pakistan believes they're correct. That's why you have a dispute. So to say that somebody cannot say something because you don't agree with them or you have a different perspective is not going to solve the situation. I mean, quite frankly, at this time, there are very, very big economic issues that are facing the world, especially a recession. India has concerns about employment. I don't know that this necessarily is going to have a positive outcome for anybody in particular. And the concern, as I said, it was kind of a surprise move. And people are, yes, very concerned about any kind of escalation. So at this point, yes, I would agree from one aspect that you said, that China generally says that such matters are internal affairs, especially when it comes to their actions. But remember, they have about a sixth of this region in dispute. You have 50%, and then the Pakistanis have about a third. So when you start looking at this situation, it needs to be talked out as opposed to having kind of unilateral action. Now, I understand that you'll probably bring up the fact that China reorganized areas in the south where they have control, and that India complained about that and said that that's not correct. These are issues, as I said, that hopefully can be resolved, and that at some point these border disputes will stop being an impediment to economic progress.
And Einar Tangen, one last question. It's a twofold question, actually. You referred to the border, so my first question, the first part of my question refers to the boundary issue. Now, for 70 years, the line of actual control has been in place, but the resolution of the border issue is still hanging fire. Now, this when China has resolved its boundary issue with all but two of its neighbors, namely India and Bhutan. 14 other neighbors, it has resolved its boundary. Why do you think it is so, number one? And number two, when China did not respect the arbitration tribunal in the South China Sea order, with what face can China now invoke rules-based conduct for other countries?
Yeah, the answer to your first question is that China believes that it is in the right. I mean, the second question, they had this kind of 11-dash line, which became a 10-dash line, became a 9-dash line. No one knows exactly what it means, but China has asserted that it has historical rights in the South China Seas. Now, whether or not that makes them an outlier, given that they are an actual signatory to the UN Convention of Laws of the Seas, that has to be decided by not, hopefully, by wars and armed action, dead bodies, but rather by pressure, sitting down at the negotiating table and figuring out. In terms of the land-based disputes, yes, you're correct, but it takes two to arrive at an agreement. And the Beijing perspective is that India has not been forthcoming. They've indicated, they believe that India's indicated everything it wants, but nothing of what it's willing to give. Generally, in such situations, whether it's business or diplomacy, there's this desire to give and take. Hopefully, that can be the future means by which these issues can, in fact, be settled.
All right, on that note, Einar Tangen in Beijing, thank you so much for sharing your insights into this developing story. Appreciate it. All right, for more on this story, I'm now joined by my colleague Siddhant Sibal, who is joining us live from New Delhi. Siddhant, have you heard Einar Tangen give his insights into the developing story, as it were? As we speak, Qureshi has landed in Beijing for talks with his Chinese counterpart. But Aina Sangha making a couple of interesting points there. One, he says that Beijing has perhaps been taken by surprise by India's decision, one, to abrogate Article 370, and two, to bifurcate Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories, namely of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. And he also says, blames rather India for not doing enough to resolve the boundary issue with China. Your thoughts, Siddhant?
Well, we have seen the comments by the Chinese foreign minister in the aftermath of Indian decision, but by and large it's rhetoric. Not much has changed on the ground. Whatever has happened is happened inside Indian territory. But right now, China needs India more than India needing or having any kind of engagement or help from Beijing, given the fact that Beijing itself is on the line of fire, particularly from Washington. And we also know that when it comes to 5G, that has been a crucial issue. We know that China will be eagerly waiting for New Delhi's decision on 5G issues. So right now, we also know that the Indian foreign minister is going to China. He will be in China from 11th to 13th. He will be in Beijing immediately after the visit of the Pakistani foreign minister. But this is, of course, a pre-scheduled visit, nothing to do with the visit of the Pakistani foreign minister. But by and large, both the countries are now waiting for the big informal summit, which is going to take place here in India, the second informal summit. And both have other things to discuss on. So by and large, it's a statement, it's a rhetoric made from China, and nothing has changed on the ground. So clearly, Chinese side right now will be focusing on making sure ties with New Delhi are healthy, and both of them can be on the same page on global issues. And Pakistan, by and large, is a liability as of now for China, given the fact that Pakistan has been more in the news for the issue of terrorism. We know the FATF meeting will be happening in October, and in that meeting, the focus will be on Beijing, whether Beijing will go ahead and allow its all-weather ally to be blacklisted, or whether Beijing is going to back Pakistan.
All right, so as Siddhant was pointing out, all eyes on Qureshi's talks in Beijing today and India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar's forthcoming visit to Beijing from the 11th to the 13th of this month. On that note, Siddhant Sibal in New Delhi, thank you very much for your insights. Appreciate it.